Okay, we're going to open the March 6th meeting of the Port of Bellingham Board of Commissioners meeting. This is an open meeting, and going to start this morning, or this afternoon, with a public comment period for anybody wishing to make public comment. I do have two people signed up already. If there's others of you, don't let that stop you. You're more than willing to. We'd like to have you discuss anything that comes to mind, anything that might be before this commission. We're going to have about 15 minutes of public comment period, and we wish that you would hold your comments to about 3 minutes if you would. And we're going to start with Francis Allen.
Where would you like me to go? Right here?
Either Mike.
Right here.
Can you hear me? Okay. My name is Francie Allen. I'm a sculptor and educator and served the city as a juror for the acid ball design. I'm urging the Port Commissioners to say no to Harcourt's design proposal for expensive condos at the waterfront. What will work as wealthy condos for the city of Bellingham? Number one, that they will be enthusiastically bought up and lived in. Number two, that they will contribute positively to the city by their location and looks, benefit the rest of us. This is especially important at the waterfront, which we all hope will become a vibrant, mixed-use neighborhood that will draw people, business, and culture. Do Harcourt's condo buildings achieve these goals? I say absolutely they do not. Bellingham is a popular place for people to retire to, so many of the buyers of these condos will be wealthy retirees. The reason why wealthy retirees would choose Bellingham in the first place is its smaller, more intimate human scale and the distinctive and charming environmental features of this particular spot on the planet. These are not people who are going to select for their dream home buildings like those being proposed, huge block-like, cold, slick structures that you might find in a huge metropolitan city like Dublin or New York. At a price of $1 million+, they can afford to buy beauty, charm, and distinction, none of the attributes of the Harcourt's design. Potential buyers move here for hiking, skiing, boating, and to experience the harmony of nature. So how about living spaces that are also harmoniously connected to nature? Just because the site plan uses 3 big rectangles at 90 degrees to each other on the shoreline, these shapes are schematic to indicate placement, are they not? Why does Harcourt need to follow these 3 footprints in the design of the actual spaces? How about lacy, more open-form building facades or courtyards that allow trees and other natural forms right up close to their bathrooms and kitchens? How about more individualized units that are staggered, offering rhythm and variety? Or units in diagonal directions that offer different kinds of views in addition to the one big ocean view? How about homes with inviting walkways and paths that offer interesting views between and around the buildings? I'm afraid that building these particular designs would most likely result in a lot of empty spaces, depressingly hard to sell and fill. Secondly, just as these structures are not going to express the lifestyle of the potential buyers who choose Bellingham, they also do not enhance the inviting quality that we want at the waterfront. Will visitors be attracted to these buildings and return again and again in order to look at them? Harcourt did not do their homework. They sent design proposals that have nothing to do with Bellingham's unique beauty, its local history, its fishing industry, native peoples, and citizens. Instead, these designs are about power and isolation of personal space. Is this presentation what we want in the first new project on the waterfront? Thank you.
Thank you. And I apologize. I did mispronounce your name. It is Francie.
Francis, actually.
And now Judith Akins.
My name is Judith Akins. I'm a member of the Blue Green Waterfront Alliance. And first of all, I want to thank you all for all your time and effort that you have used in meeting with us and explaining the new development on the waterfront. It was extremely helpful. And there's other people going to comment later, but just mentioning that the increased energy use on the waterfront, we'd like you to look at offsetting that increased energy use with renewables. So we could have solar over the garages or solar on rooftops, those kinds of things that would offset the increase of power that's going to be used down the waterfront. I know, talked with the city of Bellingham, they have, renewable plans, and I know you have things in your draft, and I have not explored that. The draft's not out yet, so we're looking forward to looking at the draft and see what you have in there, but really offsetting all the increased power use with what you have already down here and using solar that might help offset those increased uses. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak? Seeing none? That will close the public comment period, and we'll move on to the consent agenda.
A motion to approve consent agenda items A through C.
Any discussion?
I have no discussion.
Yeah, neither do I.
Nor do I. Motion to approve.
Aye.
Aye.
Commissioner Bell, aye. Okay. One thing I didn't do that I wanted to do first, and I want to do it probably before each and every one, is I want to announce the advisory committee meeting schedule. I wanted to announce the Marina Advisory Committee is on Tuesday, March 13th, 6 p.m. at the Harbor Center Building. The Technical Airport Advisory Committee meeting is on Thursday, March 8th at 9:30 in the ARF Conference Room on Bakerview Road. And then the Bellingham International Airport Advisory Committee meeting is on Thursday, March 8th in the ARP Conference Room on Bakerview Road. Just wanted to make sure I got that in early. And now we'll move on to presentations. Western Washington University Small Business Development Council. Don?
Good afternoon. Okay, you said this is loaded?
Yes, Brian.
I see PDF.
Yeah, close this. Is this one it?
Yes, thank you. CJ Sites Small Business Development Center, Western Washington University. I'm here this afternoon to talk about the 2017 deliverables in support of the funding we get from the port through the interlocal agreement with the county, the city, and the port. I thought I'd start today with a brief framework of the program and then get into the 17 deliverables and some trends. The Small Business Development Center is a federal program, and it relies on collaboration between the federal government, local government, and higher education. In 1980, the legislation was enacted, and the legislators at the time wanted to get technical assistance into the small business entrepreneurs and do it in a way that we can tailor a program that fits the needs of each community. So we have federal dollars coming in that require a local match, and then we are hosted by a higher education institution. In Whatcom County, we've been here for 35 years, hosted by Western Washington University. One of the things I appreciate most about this program is the framework and the ethics that are built in. Every year, the counselors are required to sign a code of conduct that states things like confidentiality. We can't give the names of our clients. We're not allowed to make referrals with any outside interest. Every impact that we're reporting to the government or anywhere has to be verified in writing by our clients. Business advisors are required to go through a certification that takes about 6 months and proves competencies in 11 different areas. We're accredited by a national body, and we do get federal audits from the SBA and site visits. The purpose of the program is to create economic vitality in our communities, and we do this by helping existing businesses grow and by helping new businesses start smart. About 80% of our clients are existing businesses here that are growing, that are working on strategy or efficiencies. And then the other 20% are startups that are what we call qualified startups. So somebody that is beyond ideation and is ready to start putting financials together for the formation of some sort of capital. And the client mix really is by design, because we know that our growth is coming from businesses that are already here, both the job growth and the capital investment. Pictured here is your local service delivery team. We have 3 certified business advisors: Eric Grimstead, Sherry Damon, me, and then we have a program advisor that is Haley Halverson, so she takes care of all the front end and all the back end of all the different reporting agencies. And we have 2 MBA graduate students that work with us that are doing applied research for us. So they're taking resources at Western, sitting in with clients, and able to tailor advice based on the research that they find. Our success measures are set by the federal government, and they're looking for business starts, capital formation, which could be in the form of either debt or equity, and then businesses that are either saved or created, saved or retained. So we measure these annually, and keep in mind that these are direct economic outcomes. We're not measuring any indirect outcomes that might come from it. We have 3 core services, so the majority of what we do is our one-on-one confidential business counseling, that's in-depth technical assistance, the applied research, which I just talked about with the MBA students, and then more and more we're working with faculty that are interested and working with their students in real case scenarios instead of just, paper case scenarios. So we have been working more with faculty where it suits our clients and can help out. So one of the questions I get asked a lot is, what do you do exactly? What do your days look like? And that is such a hard question for us to answer, because we create a scope of work for each client. So they'll come in with a scenario. We work through what we think a good process might be, and everyone's different. But even if they are the same, and let's say they're searching for capital, our goal is to grow entrepreneurs. So we're doing lots of education, and depending on where our client is and their understanding, we're going to meet the client where they are and educate as we go so that we can keep growing knowledge in our community. The other question I get asked a lot is, how do you fit into the whole economic development sphere in Whatcom County? So huge high level is, of course, that the port's the ADO, and that we're responsible for coordinating the economic development activities, marketing our community, bringing new businesses into the community. The SBDC does not do strategy, so we're following the SEDS, we're following the workforce development strategic plan. We're doing in-depth work with individual businesses as opposed to working on a community-wide strategy. Or should I say setting the strategy? Of course, we work with the strategy. So our 2017 services. We had almost 300 clients enrolled in our program. That means that they're receiving the counseling. Another 200 clients came to us, and we were able to help them with not the in-depth counseling. So maybe we gave them a referral to an outside agency, or we're able to quickly answer their questions on the phone. How do I get a business license? Do I have to pay B&O tax? Stuff that doesn't really warrant an in-depth meeting. We completed 41 projects with our MBA students. We had 47 projects that we worked with faculty, and this is faculty across the board. So I think international business we had, marketing, engineering, and we also conducted 13 trainings. The industries that we serve, our largest was service, so a variety of different venues of that service. We worked a lot with manufacturing this year, and also food and accommodation, healthcare and construction. Our client base is growing. The areas of counseling. Last year, we worked with marketing, was our biggest chunk, and that's for 2 reasons. One is that we worked with a professor that, and the students that did website reviews for some of our clients, and that drove a lot of more work our way. So if they found out they wanted to work on analytics or work on their copy, so they came into us and did some in-depth work there. The other reason is that a lot of our clients have been with us for a long time, and they are learning more about social media marketing, digital marketing. The next biggest chunk of the work that we've been doing is HR, and managing. So as these enterprises are growing and the economy is growing and these businesses are becoming more sophisticated, and the skill set of these entrepreneurs are becoming more sophisticated. So we had a lot of coaching in that arena. How do I manage a complex operation? What about this personnel issue? Those questions are coming more and more our way. And finally, the other big piece that we're doing that's growing is our buy-sell activity, and I'm going to dive into that just a little bit here. So we look at our clients 3 different ways. New buyers, which is a person just coming in wanting to buy a business. Buyout, so maybe partners are buying partner shares, or there's a family succession. And then, of course, sellers. And we worked with 49 different individuals last year, and a lot of this work will never, ever make it into our success story or our metrics, because sometimes no is the best answer. Sometimes we'll go through a project and the buyer will say, gosh, this really isn't for me. And that's a win, right? Because sometimes no is good. And we'll work with the seller, and we're not creating economic impacts from that, but we helped retain businesses in the community. So I'm just going to get into a couple examples here. Eric last year worked with a service operation with a buyer and was able to successfully buy that business, and it's nearly paid, the debt's nearly paid at this point, and the business is just booming as they continue to work with Eric. Last year, I saw a local transportation company that wanted to buy out another transportation company, and so we did a lot of work diving into tax returns and recasting financials, and is there economy of scales? And it turned out that it just wasn't going to work for the new owner, and he passed on that deal. Hopefully, we'll get to see that one again. The final one here is a manufacturer in the community, and we're working both sides of that. So this is a long-term client of mine who's selling, has a broker, it's public, and we've had 4 different people come and want to buy that business. So they'll come, and for whatever reasons, like 2 of them have passed and 2 of them are still actively looking at the deal. So we're able to work on both sides of those deals. So the buy-sell is important for us to keep getting the word out that we are working with professionals. We work with accountants. We work with lawyers. We bring teams together. And we want more and more people to know that we're able to do this so that businesses don't just close when they're done. You know, we've seen a couple of those, and we would really love to retain a good, healthy businesses. So finally, the local return on investment. For every dollar in our budget, we're returning $16 in the way of capital formation. But that doesn't quite tell the whole story, because for every local dollar, we are able to get federal dollars to match those. So it's actually double that for the return on investment for our local community. And so finally, I just want to end our presentation thanking you for your continued support of our program. We get to see every day what this does for entrepreneurs in our community, and wanted to pass on all the thanks that we get. So thank you very much. Is there any questions that you have before I end today?
I have one question. Back when you, on the jobs and from 2013 to 2017, I believe it said retaining and new. Are most of those, when you're talking about the retained jobs, and that is that the company came in, was having difficulties, came in and reorganized with you so they could keep their existing business going? Is that what that portrays to?
That's mostly about what that portrays. And so there's, as we're booming in our economy, we don't have as many as those. And it's also, we count job retentions when we do buy-sells too. So if we're working on the buy side and we're able to help conclude that deal, we'll count those jobs as retained in our community also. So yes, so it would be a business struggling or a business transferring.
Well, thank you for what you and your team do for the county. We really
Thank you for
appreciate
your
it.
support.
And that was a follow-up, just kind of on my side. So on a buy-sell side, even though the seller may or may not be going out of business, even though there's a buy-sell, does that counted as a retained job? I'm a little unclear on what
Right, we
defines a
do count
retained.
them as a retained job if we conclude the deal.
If it's sold, so it doesn't matter that,
Only if we're working with the buyer, though. So if it's sold, I'm working with the seller, right now in a $2 million business that's transferring with lots of jobs, we're not working with the buyer. So only, so we don't count those economic impacts because we didn't help on that side. It's just the way the federal rules are written, unfortunately. But yes, when it's a healthy business transferring, we still count those as retained jobs in our community.
And what's the difference between a client and a non-client?
A client is somebody who's officially enrolled into our program and is receiving the one-on-one confidential business counseling services. A non-client is somebody that came to us and we were able to help, but that didn't need our counseling services. So referrals, quick questions that a counselor can answer on the phone, those sorts of activities.
Tell me about the geographic spread of your, the work you do.
In terms of like how many clients we have in the communities,
Yeah.
oh goodness, I'm going to be taking a stab here. The majority of the clients that we have are in Bellingham. And I'm gonna say my best guess is about 70% are in Bellingham, and then out in the rural communities. I could follow up with some more details on that. But to that end, we are just hiring a rural certified business advisor because we do need to be more proactive in the rural communities and make sure that folks know that we're out here and we're ready to help them.
Great. Will that continue to be located at your same office, or will that be elsewhere?
We have our main office in downtown Bellingham. We also have an office in Barkley Village, and this new position will be circuit riding. So they'll be out in the communities, meeting at businesses, meeting at coffee shops. We have in the past had set locations in conference rooms that we were able to negotiate. We're just going to kind of see how that goes, and if we're able to accommodate the clients without doing that. We found that we didn't use it that often, but yeah, so there'll be circuit riding out in the communities.
Great. Well, I've personally seen in action your team, and it's very professional and very useful, and it's just the kind of support our community needs for having the vibrant economic climate that we want. So, thank you.
Thank you very much.
And I just have one last, I'm sorry.
No problem.
Capital development, you said that for every dollar, you've got about 16 back. Is that new capital infused into the community?
That's right.
In the form of loans, or is it mostly venture capital coming in?
It's mostly debt. So it's
Mostly
mostly
debt.
loans that are coming in. There's some equity that's coming in. So there would be not necessarily venture, but we do some of that. But also if an owner has cash too, right? So if the owner, there's been some cash sales that have come in, and then, but the majority is financed through debt.
And just on a personal note, are you finding credit easing at all, or is it still pretty difficult?
Oh no, banks are competing. They're being aggressive. So we always want more access to capital. That's for sure. And I'm not saying it's unsecured, but we do have federal guarantees. So the SBA does 95% guarantee on the 7A loans, the working capital, and then financing properties not ever that hard. But when we're talking about working capital, which is the hardest to do, we're seeing some banks competing. So we'll encourage our clients to shop deals, and they are getting competing offers. So.
Thank you.
You bet.
Anything else?
Thank you. And I'll follow up with that information about our clients' geographic areas. Okay.
All right, now we have a few action items. The first one,
Authorize the executive director to approve the project memorandum for project number 2, waterfront residential buildings redevelopment, submitted by Harcourt Bellingham LLC in accordance with the Section 5.1 of the Master Development Agreement, or MDA.
Thank you, Diane. Good afternoon, Commissioners. First of all, pardon me if I have a coughing fit here. I am coming down the tail end of a cold here, so bear with me. Brian Gowron, Director of Environmental Programs. This is the project memorandum that's before you for consideration today. It's actually a relatively simple document. It's only about 3 or 4 pages, but it is the first that's come before the Commission for consideration for a new project that's being proposed by Harcourt for the Commission's consideration. So I do have a couple slides that I want to go over, a little bit of background, talk about the MDA and how this fits into that before addressing any questions for you. So, as I'm sure the Commission recalls, back in May of 2015, the Port entered into a Master Development Agreement, or MDA, with Harcourt for the redevelopment of about 19 acres of property within the downtown waterfront of the Waterfront District. And although that MDA does provide Harcourt with essentially an exclusive right to develop within those 19 acres, it was not a wholesale transfer of property to Harcourt. It was we structured that master development agreement to be a project-by-project agreement where Harcourt could propose a project to the port for consideration and then move forward with those on an individual project-by-project basis, rather than a wholesale transfer of 19 acres to Harcourt. But in how that is the process and procedures for how that comes forward is detailed in the MDA, and the first step is for the proposal of a project memorandum, which is before the commission today. And the elements that are included in a project memorandum for Harcourt's proposal include a project schedule, a project design concept, a detailed description if there's any proposed use of impact fee credits that the port has, whether it's park impact fees or traffic impact fees, a parking plan, and a financing plan. And as part of the MDA, it was also indicated that the port would not unreasonably withhold, condition, or delay the approval as long as those elements are generally meet with the master plan, the MDA, and the elements that are in the sub-area plan. So the project that's before you for today for consideration is the 3 waterfront residential units. We've talked about these for a while now. Actually, Harcourt brought forward the first project memorandum to the port back in November of 2016. And it included at the time was actually 4 proposed buildings. And we had to work through with the city, with Harcourt, with shorelines, parcel sizes, a variety of things that really got that project back into what would be considered fitting with the master development agreement and the sub-area plan that's in effect right now, as well as the proposed sub-area plan amendment that we've been discussing with the commission for the past few months. So they revised that a number of times, and now we have the memo that's here for consideration. It addresses 3 buildings along the waterfront here that are between Granary Avenue, that's under construction right now, and Whatcom Waterway and Whatcom Waterway Park. So it's the 3 buildings that are in the blue box there. And this is those are still just schematics on that particular map. And this is from the project figures that go along with the project memorandum. There's 3 buildings, building A, B, and C. This is the top-down map view. It includes a kind of a street side view of showing how those are structured and what the different elements look like from the street side. And the main elements are it's primarily residential units, about 136 square feet of residential units, just over 70 individual condominium units, about 2,600 square feet of commercial, ground floor commercial, restaurants, coffee shops, some retail, that sort of thing on the ground floor. And then 15,000 square feet of public open space. And that's actually dedicated public open space that is between the buildings that will be for access to the waterfront park, have chairs, lounge areas, space for people to hang out, that sort of thing. It also includes underground parking along that whole, all 3 buildings has a single layer of underground parking. It does have about 50-foot height limits in that area, and it does comply with the current and proposed view corridors that are in that area. It's about a $32 million project, and it's currently undergoing the city design review.
So Brian, I have a question to that comment you made. It's undergoing the city design review. So the city's going to have to approve these buildings that are going to put there, what the outside looks like and so on and so forth and placement. The city is the one that's going to decide whether that happens, right?
That's correct, yeah. That's
The Port Commission is not going to design or decide what they look like.
that's generally speaking the way that this works, yeah, is that the sub-area plan, along with the master plan documents that were adopted in 2013, it was not just the sub-area plan, it also had design guidelines, design regulations, and then the process that goes along with that. And so Harcourt has already started that process. They initially met with the city team, the permitting team, to generally go through the concept. They got feedback. They've come back with these revisions to those. And then after, pending Port Commission approval, and they start the formal permitting process, then they'll work with the permitting team at the city to make sure that all elements meet the design standards that have been adopted by the City Council and the Port Commission. So that's ultimately a City of Bellingham decision. Yeah.
And I believe I was president at the 2016, I believe that was over in the ferry terminal there, cruise terminal. That was a public presentation for input from the public on the design and everything at that point in time, correct?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the last part.
They took public input for what people wanted at that point in time.
Oh, yeah, they were asking for input at that time. People, a fair number of people got up and spoke about not just the layout, but yeah, kind of the overall feel and considerations of that area, yeah.
And did we have anything after that? I can't recall.
We have not had anything specific to these. Like I said, they proposed something that we initially just determined wouldn't work. It was 4 buildings in a footprint that didn't fit with the shoreline regulations, that sort of thing. So that wasn't something we were going to bring forward to the commission. So then we've been working with their team to revise that and get it back into a box that really fits with what is allowable.
Okay, thank you.
And that was actually the presentation. Staff does recommend approval in that it meets with the minimum requirements of the master development agreement, but I'm happy to entertain any questions.
Question?
Yeah, I've got a number of questions about the designs that are in front of us, and it's my request that we postpone vote on this till our next meeting so that we're able to have some more time with both staff and to propose some questions to the design team. We got this last week, and for me, having this be my first time seeing these proposals, it's opened more questions than answers for me, and I feel that even though I have had a number of meetings, both with professional members of our community and lay people, I haven't been able to get all of my questions answered yet. So I would appreciate having more time to be able to feel that I was able to make the best decision.
So in actuality, you're asking us, not him, for more time.
That's correct.
I think we could discuss it right now. I've been here this will be the third season, and we've had trouble getting this off the ground and getting moving, and I don't want to throw a brick in front of the wheels now. Could you explain to me in particular what we're trying to gain with taking this item off the agenda?
Sure. For me, I think some of this comes back to some of Francine's comments that the type of design we've been shown is design that I'm not sure necessarily fits with all of the guidelines that are addressed here in the sub-area plan. And once we agree to put this in motion to sell, we as a entity don't have much say anymore in the process. Most of that design review is going to happen at the city. Most of the public comment is going to happen at the city. And for us, this is a prime opportunity to make sure that the investment that we've put in is consistent with our expectations. So for me, my question is what we're seeing here consistent with what we've been told to expect all along? And is it consistent with the expectations that we think are both reflected in this document here and with what we feel that this can achieve? And I'm not opposed at all to the overall plan, and I think this fits with the overall plan of having residential structures there. I'm in favor of that. I'm in favor of seeing this moving forward. It's exciting that we finally achieved this step. It's a major marker of success. It's my concern that moving forward without a little bit of more time, we could get a product that we're not going to end up being satisfied with, that's not potentially going to meet the market demand that they're looking for, and doesn't tie into some of our other opportunities. So, I'm just going to go and read a couple things here out of the sub-area plan. It's a document that is lengthy and but also insightful, and I think we would be incorrect if we didn't recognize that a huge amount of time went into producing this. And so to honor that investment of time that went into this document, I want to make sure that we're adhering to it. It's not our role to be a design committee at the port, but it is our role to make sure that design, which is one of the criteria there for reviewing the memorandum, that is of sufficient quality. So point 33 on page 21, building design policies. One of the items we're supposed to do is establish a design regulation and predictable design review process to ensure that building designs are consistent with the intended character of the various development areas. That leads me to ask, is there a concept of character? Is there a concept of what's also described later in here of sense of place? What I'm seeing here doesn't evoke a sense of place to me. It doesn't connect with our historical structures on the site. It doesn't connect with the maritime industry. It doesn't connect with necessarily anything else about our community. These strike me as kind of any town, anywhere, or everyone loves to vilify Bellevue for some reason. Buildings that could be found anywhere. And so for me, that brings up some questions. Sense of place is identified here in the document as a goal. There's a goal about section building design, section 2.c, variation of design building. And maybe you could back up a couple slides here to this one here. So the intent here, to avoid repetition and monotony, create a range of different forms similar to the variety of buildings found in a traditional downtown. The guideline is when development includes 3 or more buildings, we have 3 buildings here, the buildings within a development should not use identical footprints or elevations.
Yeah, I mean, this is an elements, those are exact elements that the city design, team will review. And
Yeah.
these were based on, they did make variations based on their preliminary input. I don't know what the range of acceptable, variability is. The types of materials used, the offsets, the general shapes. There are some limitations on this site, though. This particular one is relatively limited in that it's sandwiched between the road and the park, and we can only go so far on either side because you've got parks on either end there, and it's in the shoreline, and it's got height limitations. So versus some of the other areas, I think within the footprint of the actual downtown waterfront, this is probably one of the more constrained sites. So getting variability is going to be a little more challenging. But that is an element that would be reviewed by the city's design team for sure. Some of the preliminary designs they had were just very conceptual. They were almost cookie cutter. I mean, they were just cut and paste of the same building. That was just to show the concept of where they wanted to have things. This came out of their initial review with the city's team. Then there's a formal process that goes along with that. So no, I think all the stuff you're reading is exactly right. But how that's going to be interpreted by the regulator, which is the city, is the question. But I fully acknowledge your question and welcome the discussion.
And many of these, my real problem is many of the things in here don't have many teeth. So there's lots of suggestions in here. And when I look at these plans, it makes me feel that the suggestions that we've put considerable amount of time and effort into, I don't know to the extent that they're being applied. And if these designs had some innovative architectural design, some wow factors, some evidence, we know Harcourt can build innovative, iconic, landmark structures. We see it in the Belfast property. I'm not seeing that here. We are not a design review board, but we want to make sure that the quality that we're getting is going to be there, especially these corners of the buildings. This is the entranceway to this district. It abuts on a public park. The corners of these buildings are going to be very visible. And I know the city design team has already asked for more architectural features, and that hasn't come through from the first iteration of those plans to this one. So do we have an expectation that it will in future design processes? I guess seeing these has just left me with more questions than less, and I was hoping that when I saw these, it would leave an impression of feeling secure and with more certainty that the major investment that we've put forth is going to be actualized in the way we want it to be. So,
I think those are all fair points. I do want to point out that I've been to Belfast. I've seen their development there. I've also seen the Park West development in Dublin. Their residential buildings don't tend to be the iconic ones. The Titanic Museum is the iconic building because that's where they want your attention to go. I suspect when we see the hotel development come forward from them, it'll be maybe a little edgier than these are. I don't think that the product they're trying to sell, and I'm not going to pretend to know what their customer is, but I don't think the product they're trying to sell lends itself to being an iconic building when you're trying to sell high-end residential units. That's just my take on it.
And I'm going to just sort of weigh in on a couple of things. A lot of what you had objections to were subjective. When you talk about character, that is not something that you can define.
right.
And your sense of character may be very different from mine, as well as anyone else. And you also said a sense of place. And I think that is also subjective. And the variation is something I don't, given the footprint and given the constraints of the site, I'm not sure how much variation you could get on that site. By that same token, I think this, a couple of the things that you responded to with that plan would open up a can of worms, and we could be here another 2 years going through trying to define what character means and what a sense of place means. And I don't know that that's necessarily our role. I think that's the role of the city. I'm not in support of your desire. And I also believe that when it comes to market demand, which is another thing that you brought up, I don't believe that Harcourt has it in their interest to build something that the market isn't going to snap up. And I think the marketplace will take care of that by itself. And I don't think we're in a position as a body to determine whether or not this is going to be marketable. So, that being said, I'm going to respectfully decline, at least from my side, that request.
Well, I was in a room in 2016 when they unveiled what they were talking about building here, these well, it was 4 buildings at that time. And the response was very positive in the room. Good, we're going to get going, we're going to do something. It's been 2 years since then, and now here at the last minute, the flag goes up that, gee, we're not doing the right thing, it isn't going to be the right buildings, it's not going to look right, I feel like I'm going to be out of place. I mean, we can come up with 100 questions why not to do it. But how about the question why to do it? These guys are developers, that's what we do. We're not developers. We're not architects. We're not designers. We're 3 guys that sit up here and we're supposed to figure out how to make the economy in this county better. It's supposed to be our priority, and now we're arguing about what a building looks like. I'd rather decide how we put people to work. You start this project, build buildings over there, we're going to put people to work, and that's our job. I can look at these 3 buildings on the screen right here, and not one of them is drawn the same shape, and not one of them is in the same position. Therefore, that answers the question of, are they identical? Well, if you look at it, no, the outjutting's here, and the insets and the setback here is different. They're all different. So that may answer those questions you brought up there. I understand your concerns. I heard what you said. But I don't know that we can tell what the marketplace or how it's going to end up in the future. If we had a crystal ball like that, you and I'd be millionaires. We'd be on a sunny beach somewhere with a cocktail with an umbrella. We'd have the answers to everything. So part of this job up here is to take a chance. You have to feel what you think is right. We've got ongoing things moving forward here is good. I believe it's the city's job to take the task which you're speaking to, and I think they'll probably do that. Brian has alluded to things have changed there. So with that being said, I'm not in favor of taking these off the agenda, and I want to move forward with a vote.
And, you know, I went and met with the city and asked many of these same questions, and I did not come away with enough feeling of assurance that the process for review or the nature of the mostly guideline recommendations here is going to ensure that our hopes and expectations are going to be realized.
Do you understand, though, if you open up that can of worms, that we're going to have to go back and redefine that is actually a long process?
Well, I
And-
don't think it has to be redefined because much of it is already in here, but we don't know how that design review process is really going to occur.
But they're all subjective terms. And
Some
we're
of them
going to try
are.
to put a box around a subjective term.
Some are subjective terms, but some, you know, there's extensive conversation about LEED certification in here. I don't know if these are planned to be LEED certified.
Doesn't the city have responsibility over that?
Well, and there's incentives to make them LEED, and that's all we can do, is we can offer up an incentive for more buildable square feet if they go LEED, and if they don't get that bonus.
Sure.
And that's what the guidelines state. So they're incentivized to do it, but we can't force them to do it.
No, and we can't. But for me, I would like to know before we're going down that path, because, I mean, LEED is all over this document. It gets a lot of play in this publication. But again, we're not going to know if that's even the intent of this until some way when we're down the line. I think those are useful questions for us to know before we move forward. That's certainly something that has come through loud and clear from the community, that they want to see sustainable building practices occur. And I just don't know if that's the intent.
Tell you what came through louder and clearer to me. Let's get going. I mean, that was probably the number one message I heard on the road, and I think you heard it as well and agreed with
certainly
it.
did.
And I don't think another roadblock is beneficial.
I'd like to address your comment of hopes and dreams. Everybody's hopes and dreams are different. Yours certainly probably aren't the same as mine, and Commissioner Bell's probably aren't the same as mine or yours. So what happens in a big project like this is you get folks on the outside that want to see something a little bit different, and we've had that all the way through. Things have been revised, churned over, changed. Times have been changed. I mean, projects have been changed. Some of the things you want answers to, you'll never get till after it's done. I mean, some of them you can get. And I think that along the way, a lot of the things that you're speaking to, the city will address and take care of, and it's not our job to do that. We've got a piece of property that we cleaned up, and we need to sell that piece of property, and it needs to be developed and moved on. And I don't think picking apart certain little things to hold this up is the right thing to do. Personally, I don't see a big problem over there with those buildings. When I go over there and go to the park, I'm not going to go criticize what the buildings look like. I'm really glad I got a park there and I can look out. As far as iconic things, that was a pulp mill. To me, there isn't too damn many things that are iconic about a pulp mill. You know, the city wanted them out of here because they didn't want them here. So they're gone, and we've cleaned up the mess. As Director Fix spoke to, I think when we get around to the board mill building and maybe a hotel, I think that's probably where your iconic things are going to come to. I didn't expect the first 4 buildings to be iconic, and I don't expect all the buildings in there to be iconic. I think these developers spend enough time with them, not a lot of time, but enough time to think that they're pretty upfront people with what they want to do. They've worked very hard with our community to try and do what our community wants to do, although our community keeps changing its mind. And quite frankly, if I was a developer and I was trying to develop something and I couldn't get a consensus over 5 years to do something, I'd probably pack my bags. So I don't think to pressure them with, well, these buildings aren't exactly what it says in here, and handpick this apart is the thing to do. To whether it's going to be $1 million condominiums and not going to be able to sell at the top, or what, I don't know. I don't know anybody knows the answer to that. Hopefully, they will work with everybody and work with the city to address all the concerns you're speaking to there. And certainly, you should move forward with those concerns with the folks at the city level and make sure they're addressed. But as far as stopping this action from moving forward, I'm not in favor of that.
And if I may, Commissioners, we can additionally, regardless of how this goes tonight, if it's tabled or not, we can forward on those questions and still address those questions, and continue to work collaboratively with the city team, Harcourt team. They've been very responsive to input. I mean, these versions are different than the last version, and they have been very cooperative and open to suggestions. So just by moving forward on approving the project memorandum alone does not set any of this in stone. It is a step forward that is moving in that direction, but it doesn't close the door on correspondence and collaboration with them on these things. So we have some of your comments that you've provided, and we can definitely forward those on, and we'll actively work with them and get you some of the answers on how that's being interpreted and work with the city team as well.
And I'm just going to add that I think the best predictor of future activity is past performance. And I think when you look at what Harcourt has done at the Granary Building in the way of protecting our iconic structure and doing it in a way that we wanted by preserving everything down to the heart-shaped vine structure on the outside and maintaining some of the hardware inside so that they can make it work. And even the walls, they've kept some of where the green is carved out. I think they did a fabulous job. So I think if I'm going to look at their intent, I don't see this as being a representative of their intent nor their ability. I look at their past performance. And on that note, I honestly don't, I'm wondering still why Harcourt is in this game at all, because if I were going to build that granary building, I would have not started building it until I had all of the roads and infrastructure in, and I could have built it in 2 months and not been sitting on a multi-million-dollar building for a number of years. So I think any more delay would be a disservice. So I'm gonna request that we just move forward with the authorization and call the question. Diane?
A motion to authorize the executive director to approve the project memorandum for project number 2, Waterfront Residential Buildings Redevelopment, submitted by Harcourt Bellingham LLC in accordance with Section 5.1 of the Master Development Agreement, or MDA.
Mr. Briscoe?
I think it's all in favor.
Oh, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I'm not in favor.
Motion passes 2-1.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Action item number 2.
A motion to approve the Small City Economic Development Funds for projects in the cities of Sumas, Everson, Ferndale, and Linden.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. John Mitchner, Economic Development Specialist here at the Port. Just a quick background on this program. The Port Small City Economic Development Fund was created by the Port Commission in 2004 to help underwrite planning, feasibility, capital projects in the small cities and support local economic development growth. Through 2017, the Port has obligated over $680,000, while the cities provided hard match exceeding $950,000. These combined efforts supported over $20 million in other funds for final capital projects based on the information gathered across the cities. So we're looking at the 2018 applications for this fund for the cities of Linden, Ferndale, Everson, and Sumas, totaling $58,250, with 2 other projects, one from Linden and one from Ferndale, being carried over from 2017 for an additional $26,135, coming to a total request of $84,385, all of which is in the economic development budget. Do I have any questions?
I guess, how do you feel this program has been working over the years, John?
I think it's worked quite well, quite frankly. For example, I mean, just one present example here with Linden, what they're going to be able to do with these funds is extend utilities across West Main to their West Linden Park, opening up 130 acres up there for development. And that's where a lot of folks have been looking. You know, the cold storage facility went in up there in the last couple of years. They just expanded, actually. So there's some, and Linden Door is up in that area. So it's been a great job creator for the Linden community, as one example. Ferndale's going to look at tying in their, what are they calling it, their heritage tourism projects with the county wayfinding that's going forward. to promote more tourism in the business, which is another great economic development driver for the community. So all in all, I think it's worked quite well.
Yeah, so we're seeing job creation from this, fair amount of job creation.
Yes, we definitely are, Commissioner, yes.
Good, thank you, John.
You're welcome.
And I'm concerned about Sumas and Everson, and wondering what your opinion is on what we can do to create some opportunities in those areas, because it's easy to talk about Ferndale and Linden.
Sure.
But let's talk about some of those underserved areas, and let me ask the question, what can we do?
Yeah, you know, Sumas is a great example, and they're very business friendly. They're looking always to grow their economy up there. They're opening up new plats for new homes in the area that they want to get built. Unfortunately, in the past, a lot of it's been contingent upon the Canadian dollar and, you know, Canadians coming across and doing business and stuff. So given that situation, and we can't control that, so what can we do to keep their economy going, getting more robust things up there? Teal Jones is expanding up there. Saco Industries has expanded. IKO Pacific is looking like they're doing, they did some expansion recently. And when projects come up, we always can include Sumas in the list of potential sites to locate things. One of the issues we have found is a lack of available workforce in the area, which we like seeing the city address by opening up these lands, platting more homes and making it, because in terms of affordable housing, it's a great area of the community, of the county to do that. So with the more homes that are going to be going in, we'd like to see that's getting addressed and more business can be brought to the area. The particular project here they're asking for, it's really kind of great. They're going to GIS map their electrical system, the whole grid. So, for example, they can see what power is being used by who, by when, by where. If there's a power outage, they'll know where it is, and they can send the appropriate crews out with the appropriate safety gear to address that issue. So in that regard, this particular project, I think, is a great one for them on a number of different levels that way. And Everson, the same way, they're looking to do some work on their main street there that will open up more of the commercial core to develop businesses in that area too, hoping that that can, you know, get things going out there.
Tell me about how things get prioritized on here. Don, do you participate in the prioritization of projects in partnership with the small cities?
What this actually does is we put the applications out at the beginning of the year, and through the Small Cities Partnership that we convene monthly, the cities themselves, actually the city administrators and mayors, will sit down and sort of talk amongst themselves about what makes sense and, you know, who did a project last year, this year, how much money is available going forward. And so they sort of self-select what it looks like. And this year particularly, all the projects that were submitted are getting funded. We were able to cover them all, so we didn't really have to decide that way. But typically that goes forth out of the small cities meetings, and then they bring the recommendation forth that we then bring to you.
And when do things come are asked for funding through this source as opposed to the EDI fund?
That's another good question. These are probably more on the smaller scale, if you will, a lot more of the planning side of things in going to that type of deal than once you might actually go into the actual project. That could then translate into an EDI type project where you're going to be much larger scale. This is more on the planning side of stuff.
Okay.
I'm not a big fan of hoping that something will come and putting out a general plan and saying, let's hope it comes. So I'm really a fan of specific items that we can do
Right.
To help enhance this. And we've heard a lot about broadband. And I really think that getting Everson Sumas area connected would probably be one of the better things that we could do for the region. And I'm wondering if you agree with that assessment?
You know, any connectivity that we could bring to the community anywhere helps, absolutely. No question about it, sure.
We got some help in Olympia yesterday
Yeah, we did,
on
yeah.
that. 49-0, 6617 passed out of the Senate. So, yeah, 49-0.
And are we still a small county?
Well, they took that language out, and I think all ports now have that authority. So I think we're in good shape there versus some of the proposed legislation restricted ports from doing this. So, yeah, we'll have more conversations with the three of you about what we'd like to do broadband-wise out in the county, but I think we have the authority now and just have to find the funding.
Yep.
So next step is signature from the governor. And
Signature from the governor, and
that
then
kind of margins on support, we should expect passage.
I would hope.
Send him a pen with a lot of ink.
And so on that note, anything we can do to help, the more specific, the better. I think there's just enough, there's so many areas looking for people to come in and build something somewhere. And we've got to differentiate ourselves somehow, and especially in those areas that are hard to attract. And anything we can do specifically that you can bring back, just let us know.
Will do. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Any more discussion? Call the motion. All in favor?
Well, do you need to reread?
Do you-
I'd like it reread.
A motion to approve the Small City Economic Development Funds for projects in the cities of Sumas, Everson, Ferndale, and Linden.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Thank you. All right, action item number, it's 5:30.
Probably a good time for a break and then come back for a public comment.
Yep.
Yeah.
So take a 10-minute Reconvene. And I'd like to reconvene the Port Commission meeting for March 6, 2018, with another public comment period. Do we have a sign-up sheet? Anyone signed up? If not, it is public comment period. Anyone can speak. We try to limit this to 15 minutes, and you have 3 minutes to say anything that's on your mind. Anyone care to speak?
We don't have anyone signed up.
And seeing no one, we'll move on. And I do want to, one more time, mention that we do have the Marine Advisory Committee meeting on Tuesday, March 13th, the Technical Airport Advisory Committee on Thursday, March 8th, and the Bellingham International Airport Advisory Committee on Thursday, March 8th as well. And then we'll move on to another action item, number 3.
A motion to adjust the scope of Capital Improvement Program, or CIP, budget 107-737 to replace the radiant heaters at Fairhaven Marine Industrial Park, or FMIP, 5 and 6, and rename the budget item to heat systems and other improvements at FMIP.
Thank you, Diane. Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Rick, State Representative here at Port. The 2017 Port capital budget approved an expenditure of $87,500 for a project to replace the radiant heaters in buildings 5 and 6 at Fairhaven Marine Industrial Park. Work on this project was assigned to our port maintenance staff, and upon their evaluation of the existing radiant tube heat system, they determined that it would be less expensive to replace the worn parts rather than replace the entire heater system in these 2 buildings. So work has involved replacing the tubings, the couplings, failed burners, and control panels, and the system's now been recalibrated based on the manufacturer specifications. So not only is this work being accomplished for about 20% of the original budget, but it's built institutional knowledge into our maintenance staff on maintaining the systems. So kudos goes to the port's maintenance team who worked on this. Port staff is now recommending that the remaining funds be used on an expanded scope of work to improve other buildings at the Fairhaven Marine Industrial Park, other heat systems at FMIP, including in buildings 1 and 3 are in need of repair. Furthermore, with LFS vacating premises at FMIP and moving into the F Street warehouse, there's need for additional capital improvements to be done to those buildings after the 15 or 20 years of the normal wear and tear. Extending this project to a wider scope of work will allow additional and needed capital improvements to be done at the Fairhaven Marine Industrial Park without any further budget allocation. Therefore, Port staff recommends approval. Thank you.
Keyword there being without any other port allocation. Love that line. Any other comments?
I don't know after that. No, I haven't done, thank you.
No, nice success story.
Very-
Thanks for all the work. Please make sure the staff knows that we really like having these great examples to showcase what a great team we have.
Yeah, thank you, I will.
So I will call the question for reallocation of the funds to replace the radiant heaters. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, action item number 4. Diane?
A motion to approve Resolution 1369, authorizing the executive director to purchase equipment for the Bellingham Shipping Terminal per the list provided.
Thank you, Diane. I'm Chris Clark, Marine Terminals Business Development Manager, and I want to speak on the subject of the equipment purchase. While the Bellingham Shipping Terminal has been making progress in developing a customer base for the import and export of organic animal feed, logs, and wood chips, the facility is lacking the basic cargo handling equipment needed to service break bulk cargoes such as steel coils, pipes, and I-beams. In order to proceed with our plan for regular vessel calls at the Bellingham Shipping Terminal, it is important that such equipment is acquired as soon as possible. This is especially timely as there is severe congestion at the 2 major Vancouver, BC break bulk terminals, specifically Lynterm and Fraser Surrey docks. The reason the reason that these facilities are turning away from break bulk cargo is that they're making investments in container and bulk grain trades. The net result is the Canadian steel importers and the shipping lines that serve them are looking for alternatives. So this is an excellent opportunity for the Port of Bellingham, and we are now in discussions with several major companies in this trade who would like to include us in their future plans. Now, I want to note that these cargoes would be trucked to the Vancouver, BC area after unloading in Bellingham and would not be affected by any of the proposed tariffs on steel products intended for use in the USA. So we want to thank the commissioners for their willingness to proceed with this vital step by authorizing the purchase of the equipment listed. This will be an important measure in the revitalization of the Bellingham Shipping Terminal and assure continued job creation there. We would also like to thank Local 7 of the ILWU for their valuable input on what equipment would best serve our needs. They played a central role in the process, and we are grateful for their support and persistence. So, any questions on this subject?
Well, I'd just like to say thank you to Joe and the ILWU for stepping up and helping us with what we need to make it work, and I'm assuming that you're working with them, we've come out with the right equipment.
Oh, very much so. And Joe, would you mind stepping up? And, or you can go there, please.
Yeah, Joe Schmidt, Local 7, Bellingham, Longshore. I just want to thank, a privilege to work with the port on this equipment. I think it's vital that we have the equipment for the port to market the facility. And I think we have that now. We didn't run out and buy brand new stuff. We got one piece of new equipment. We got good used stuff, just what it takes to get by to do anything we need to do. And I think we've got what it takes. I think the port's in the position now where it can market itself and get this terminal back up and going. And I want to thank the staff, the port, Rob, and the commission, old commission and new commission, for the continued support on trying to get this shipping terminal back up and going. Thank you.
And thank you for your support, Joe, because it takes two of us to make this happen.
Thank you.
And I do want to acknowledge that from the equipment list, it is not brand-new stuff that we're buying, that you guys went out and tried to save us money by finding valuable equipment that was, obviously you wouldn't use it if it wasn't in good condition. So these are the kind of toys I like. If I can go play on the Heister for a little bit, that would be fun.
I get first shot at the reach stacker. That was
Yeah,
part of the deal.
I got in trouble on one of those once.
I'm a little concerned about the bomb cart, so there's two of them. Neil, where's Neil at? Can you cover that?
So I thank you for taking the time to not only save us some money, but also put some good equipment back on the port.
Thank
So
you.
I will call the question.
And I think these are the type of investments we need to be making. Many of these things, these contracts are dependent on us having the right things on the ground today for a company to decide they're going to start using our facilities. And so I think these are making the investments to position ourselves well. My question is, what metrics are we gathering so that we're able to reflect in 2 to 3 years? Are we on the right trajectory for realizing our goals here? How do we know in 2 and 3 years, not just on a subjective feeling, but how do we know on some data points that we are achieving the goals we're looking for, or we need to allocate resources differently or make different types of investments or change our strategy?
Well, let me give you a specific example. Back week before last, we had a visit from a gentleman named Jim Ritchie, who's the CEO of Cascadia Metals. Mm-hmm. And they are the largest importer of steel coils in Western Canada and the largest producer of flat steel sheet in Western Canada. So,
Question for you, Chris. The steel coils, are they big, or all little ones, or all sizes?
well, they range from approximately 5 metric tons up to about 20 metric tons.
Yeah, I just wanted, so for people to know that we're not talking about little springs for the bottom of things, we're big stuff.
They're sizable, and And he came down to our office with one of his colleagues, and he told us that he wanted to use the shipping terminal, that he wanted to do regular shipments, about one shipment every 45 days of between 4,000 to 8,000 tons, and that he was ready to proceed. And I went up there last week and met with his staff and looked at his warehouse, and it's the real thing. He's got about 3,000 tons in his warehouse, and they're building a new warehouse adjacent to it. So when we get that kind of inquiry from that sort of level, it's more than just kind of a pie in the sky and the hopes of doing things. It's a real serious inquiry, and they want serious answers, and they want to go forward. And that's just one example of the several companies in that area that have an interest in using our facility.
Do we have the equipment on this list to take care of this?
Yes, sir, we do. Yeah, thanks to our friends at the union who have the expertise in doing steel products. They were the ones that made the suggestions on what specific equipment would be adequate to handle those cargoes.
Well, I know this gentleman's just recent, so I was curious whether we had the equipment to handle what he wants to do.
We are one step ahead of them in that respect, thanks to our friends at the
Thank you for
union.
doing that,
Yeah,
Chris.
yeah.
And thank you for being the one step ahead.
My pleasure.
And I'll add to that, we know how well we did without having this equipment, so having it.
Any other questions?
Empty warehouses didn't work, that wasn't enough.
You can't hope. So I'm
I have
done.
no more questions, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Chris.
Good. Thank you, Commissioners. Adam Fulton, Director of Facilities. It comes to me to make the purchase because contracting is under the auspices of Facilities Division, and this is a bit unusual for us. You've gotten to hear from Joe Schmidt and Chris Clark. I also wanted to recognize the rest of our selection committee. It was a very good team effort. We also had Anthony Amirati, our contracts administrator. Anthony, if you'd stand up, please. And Chris Schneider, who is one of our lead port mechanics. We felt it was very important to have a mechanic involved as he's going to be taking care of that equipment. And then last and maybe chiefly, we had Darren Williams, the foreman for the ILWU Local 7. So a fantastic group. I was really impressed by it. I was impressed by the reasonableness of it, just the realistic approach to purchase equipment. I thought it was appropriate. So before you then is a resolution we need to adopt and an action that exercises that resolution. The reason for the resolution is we're purchasing used equipment, which is a bit of a new one on us. We don't do it very often. We're very good at purchasing new things because the two items are very comparable. They're both new. Whereas used equipment, no two used things are identical. So with legal counsel's advice, we have what's called a special market condition, and that is that you're purchasing used things and you're looking for a value purchase. What's the most important about the purchase is that it's a documented process of fairness and diligence that then results in a recommendation of a value purchase again. So it's that documentation step in that process that's super important to state auditors, later in the year. So to do that, we published the evaluation criteria that we're going to use. We formed the selection committee. We went through the evaluation process. We documented that process, and then are here in making a recommendation for that equipment. This Resolution 1369 then formally publishes that process, and so it's key that we adopt that this evening. This resolution will be exercised later this year, we anticipate, with other equipment purchases for Bellingham Shipping Terminal in this year. So you'll hear this same resolution referenced perhaps later this year when we purchase other things. So again, a little bit of an unusual purchase. We think we've done the right diligence to get the right process in place. And if the commissioners have any questions about that process, I'd be happy to answer.
I have just a question. Were we fortunate enough to be able to use some local people to buy this equipment? Or
Yeah.
or most of it coming from south?
No, well, thank you for that. So we advertised, we were in contact with about 7 vendors. One of them is, all 3. We ended up getting 3 bid packets. One from Pape Machinery, which is they're local, but they're actually West Coast.
They're out on the Bakerview there.
Yeah, there's a company called Mid-Columbia, which I believe is in Tacoma, and another company called Leavitt. But our advertisement, because this equipment can simply get on a truck and come from anywhere in the United States, so we advertised actually nationwide, going out to the internet with, we're looking for big equipment, you know, and it's a funny thing. It's not like going to Walmart and purchasing something off the shelf. It's finding the piece of equipment where it is around the country and what condition it's in, et cetera. So, does that answer your question,
Yeah,
Commissioner?
but I mean, were we able to bring some of it through one of the local?
Oh, yeah, definitely. So this, of the three packages, the commission will note from the action memo that actually we're purchasing various pieces from each of the three that solicited, one of which is Pape Northwest, who has a thing here on Iron Gate.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's what kind of my question is, we're all one, or do we kind of spread it out?
Yeah, and you know, we didn't intentionally try to spread it out. It was just how the value of the pieces, of various pieces of equipment fell, and it was just that process. And they're all thrilled to be selling equipment. We think we've got the right equipment, as Chris said, for our need, and are paying the right price for it. So.
Okay, Adam, well, thank you for a great job you and your team did, and the ILW you did to put this package together so we can sell our port. Thank you. I have no further questions.
I'm good. I know equipment. This is great. I'm not going to micromanage this.
Yeah, fantastic.
So do we need to pass the resolution first?
That's all you need to pass is the resolution.
Resolution.
Yeah, so you want to read that again maybe for him?
A motion to approve Resolution Number 1369, authorizing the Executive Director to purchase equipment for the Bellingham Shipping Terminal per the list provided.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you, Commissioners.
Congrats.
Thank you.
Good work. Okay. Now we have a couple of presentations.
Yes, good afternoon, Commissioners. Alan Birdsall, the manager of Marinas. And this next presentation is at the request of the Commission. On November 7th of last year, the Director of Environmental Affairs, Brian Gowan, gave a presentation on the Phase 2 of the Whatcom Waterway cleanup that includes the ASB. And that work and that cleanup is being done under a consent decree with the Department of Ecology. That consent decree identifies the land use for the ASB as being a marina. And as part of one of the first steps of moving into the Phase 2 cleanup and design is to identify whether that land use is still accurate or if there's a different land use. So during the discussion with the Commission on November 7th, the Commission had requested that we invite Paul Sorensen in to discuss and present the current trends of recreational boating within the area. So at the request of the Commission, I'd like to introduce Paul Sorensen, who is the principal of BST Associates, which he has founded back in 1986. Paul has a master's degree in economics from the University of Washington. He serves on the board of directors for the Northwest Marine Trades Association and recently received the Made a Difference Award from the Pacific Coast Congress of Harbor Masters. Paul has undertaken studies throughout the Pacific Northwest with a focus on waterfront development, business plans for public and private sectors, and for those of us that are in the marinas, he is the expert on boater demands and trends for recreational boating in our area. So with that, Paul.
Alan can get that Jeopardy job when Alex should next time.
Alan, thank you so much for those kind words. Commission, nice to be here. Yes, I'd like to spend about 15 minutes giving you a presentation on what the boating trends are. I'm not going to present it in a way that makes a yes or no answer for you, but just sort of an overview of what's happening. And I would state at the front that these are my personal opinions on what happens, and this is how we advise our other customers as well. So I'd like to, as the agenda, to look at the wet moorage market specifically, and we're dealing with recreational boats here, not commercial boats. So let's make that clear at the beginning. Talk about some of the near-term prospects, what's happened over the last few years, and then some of the longer-term prospects. And at the back end to talk about some of the competition that you should keep in mind, and that's the plans by regional marinas that compete with you, as well as dry storage. My opinion is that the marina market's pretty precarious right now. And it's precarious because we're really in a mature market position. Usually when you think about market development, you think about a growing pie. Well, the pie is pretty soft right now in terms of its growth. And then if you're looking at expansion, as you are, it really has to do with, can you get a bigger share of that pie? What's happening with you relative to your competitors? And looking overall at development, it really depends upon what kind of risk tolerance you have if the decision doesn't go your way or things are a little longer to develop. Overall, it really is understanding your market and the strengths and weaknesses, what the market is and how your location plays out. Marinas are just like office buildings or those residential buildings that I was seeing from Harcourt. You've got a primary market area, a secondary market area, and a tertiary market area. And for every kind of facility like this, the farther you go away, the more competition there is. Yours overlaps into Canada. I'm going to talk a little bit about that and what's happening there, as well as what's happening in Puget Sound. The other thing that really is important is the funding sources and availability. There are some grant funds for transient moorage, but there really aren't any good grant programs for permanent moorage. They have to come from your own revenues or from a public-private partnership or something of that nature. We're starting to see more of those public-private partnerships now. Okay, standing back and looking at the U.S. boating market and all of the supplies to the U.S. as well as to Pacific Northwest as well. Boating is a family affair, and early boating experience is crucial. That turns out that's really crucial for fishing as well. And there's a real strong link between boating and fishing. 83% of anglers are also boaters. Active boaters are pretty economically diverse. 62% have incomes under $100,000 per year. It's usually thought of as a rich person's sport, but it isn't the case. 95% of the recreational boats in Washington State are 26 feet or less, trailerable or hand boats. One of the most compelling statistics, and this hasn't changed much over time, is that the active boaters are really out there for only 2 weeks a year and 5 hours per day. So making a decision from the boater standpoint in doing that means that they have to weigh that with travel and with other kinds of activities they might be involved with. Now, looking over time, this is a long-term trend from 1965 to 2016 for the U.S. new powerboat sales. And I really distinguish here. The used boat market is, it changes a little bit. We get some used boats in from other areas, but it's pretty well set. So it's the addition of the new boats that really make a difference in terms of new marina development. And when you think about new boat sales, and this is the powerboat sales, which is the overwhelming majority of boats, sailboats are a very small component of it. If you think about new boat sales, there are boats that are leaving the marketplace that are aging out and that are being removed. In this area as well, there's boats that are being sold that go up to Canada. So not all of the boats stay in the marketplace here. The takeaways I'd like you to look at from this is that it looks fairly volatile. It's about 5-year cycles traditionally. And you can see if you've paid any attention to economics over the past couple of decades, you see a V-shaped recovery where there's a recession in 71 or 81 or 91 and a pretty firm pop-up. But what we saw during this time period is the average number of boats really has been declining. It was about 400,000 boats per year from 65 to 91, down to 300,000 plus 1992 to 2006. And we're probably in the 200,000 range now. if we're able to attain that, somewhere between 150,000 to 200,000 boats. And what occurs to me here is that there are some things that are happening demographically, and this also spells or emphasizes that boating is a discretionary activity. People can get in and out of it very quickly. Sure.
Quick question on that last one. You do see a huge drop-off at the recession.
Yes.
Specifically on the years of the Depression, you get a
Right.
straight shot down. And then it doesn't seem to recover back to
At the very end in 2016?
anywhere along the way. Yeah, the only place it seemed to recover was back in the 80s, but it
Yeah.
doesn't seem to recover ever back to the place it was.
That's right.
So your trend line is clearly on.
It's going down.
Down.
That's it.
And if we have another
But you used to have
recession,
more of a response in those earlier recessions where it was down 1 year and then back up, and we've been waiting for this. Actually, the recession, we started to see loss of boats in 2008, and they continued to decline until 2012. So the pressure on boaters under those conditions was pretty strong.
so it's safe to say the better the economy, the more boat sales you'll see,
Absolutely, absolutely.
but never quite to the extent that it was back in the early 70s.
And that's what's going to lead me to some demographic changes that I think are happening as well. So for new boat sales for Washington State, and I looked at just 27 feet and longer, this really identifies your wet moorage market. There might be some boats that are on the little bit less than 27 feet, but this is the majority of it. During the go-go years of 2004 to 2007, when you were making decisions about ASB, we were adding 500 boats a year. And that's darn near Blaine in 1 year, if you were able to capture that. Then we fell, and you can see how far we fell. It went down to 129 boats in 2012, and that was a long slog. Many other activities during that time popped back up. This was a lot slower. And since 2012, we've had a very strong growth. I show the annual growth rate on the other side, and look at how strong that recession was. I mean, we had 3 years, 2008 through 2010, where it was 25% to 40% loss year on year. So we lost a lot of the new boat market. And then it started popping up, and we had the big year in 2014, but you can see 2014 in terms of number of boats really only got over 200 boats, over 27 feet. And then the growth rate has declined a little bit. In 2017, it was still strong. It was 8%, but nobody really is anticipating that that will continue at that growth rate. It's going to tail off a little bit. The other thing that I'd like to bring to your attention is the replacement. There really aren't good statistics about it, but there are some good statistics about how old the boats are. And just for cabin cruisers, runabouts, and sailboats, here's the age ranges. This all comes from the Washington State Department of Licensing. The National Marine Manufacturers Association, which is the association representing marine manufacturers as well as a bunch of other marine industries, marinas, et cetera, estimates boat replacement after 30 to 35 years. The portion of our fleet right now that's over 30 years, cabin cruisers, 31%, runabouts, 32%, sailboats, 68%. There was a big building of sailboats in the 70s, and so some of those have been revived, as well as the cabin cruisers and runabouts, and we've made them real. Uniflate up here and some of the other manufacturers made real good boats, so some of those are still in play. But the replacement of these could affect a substantial portion of the fleet, and it gives me concern moving forward that we might have some more issues with derelict boats. Those start to pop up. I know you've had some, and all the marinas have had some, but they've been kind of limited numbers. Also, the new sales can go for replacement of boats, but it's still not increasing the size of that pie. Sure.
With the replacement of the vessels there, and you spoke to derelict vessels, most of that stuff is wood, that we have troubles with. Any percentages in these numbers you have here of what is wood or what's fiberglass or metal?
It's a pretty small portion that's wood, and and they are older boats. But there are some that are the fiberglass boats as well that are derelict.
Huh.
With mildews and other, I think you had a boat in Blaine recently where that happened. It was a relatively new boat that wasn't taken care of probably by the owner. Once it gets the mildew in it like that, it's pretty tough to do anything with it.
Thank you.
But it's good question. I mean, you have to, I'm giving you an overview of this, and I think the point still rings true.
Is that recent numbers, fairly recent numbers we were projecting here? I mean, the percentage numbers you had there, is that?
Oh, yes, that's 2016.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank
so
you.
they're pretty new. So the near-term market fundamentals are really attractive. We've got continued GDP growth internationally as well as in the U.S. We've got good business climate in the U.S. and Washington State. Consumer confidence at a 17-year high. Increased equity in housing values and in stocks. But as I talk about these, you have to start thinking about the demographics and who that really benefits. Mostly it's people that bought their house a long time ago that would fit into the boomers, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Not so much into Gen X or into the millennials. Dealer sentiment on the marine side is really upbeat right now. Interest rates look good. I mean, the Fed will probably raise interest rates, but they'll still be at historically low levels. Great weather, and fuel prices are low. So with all of those things, we're looking at 2 to 3 years probably of continued growth, maybe not still at 8%, but year-on-year growth. And NMMA is talking about continued growth through 2020. It's stretching the growth period, though. Typically, they're 5-year periods. We started seeing that growth here in Washington State in 2012. So if we go out to 2020, then we're 8-9 years of recovery. And that's kind of pushing the tail end of that. The issues that concern me, there's 3 of them here really that affect you as well as the other marinas. The last one probably you more than some of the other ones. Recreational fishing opportunities really affect moorage. And if you can't go out and catch fish, there's going to be problems. The increasing age of boaters, the average age has crept around about a half a year per year for each of the last 10 years. And participation and ownership rates by millennials is really uncertain, whether they have the wherewithal to do it or the interest in doing it. So there's all kinds of programs to help generate that demand, but it's uncertain yet whether it will be successful. And then Canadian boaters using wet moorage in Washington State, either for transient or for permanent moorage, have been really impacted by the value of the dollar. And I've got a slide to show you how that impacted on the transient side later. So fishing is the #1 most popular boating activity, second most popular outdoor activity. Most of it happens in freshwater. But it's very important, and getting new fishing participants that are younger and more diverse, that's a big effort now by the national industries and the state industries really to reflect more what the changes are in the population base. And that dealers are indicating that there are upgrades that are happening. What concerns me are issues like this happening right now for the Puget Sound Chinook Harvest Management Plan. It's in its draft form, and it'll be discussed for another year. It's really in response to the poor habitat losses affecting the stock of fish. And it's going to get more severe in terms of the restrictions. The populations have decreased by about 40%, and with less fish, there's going to be more competition as to whether they go to recreational, commercial, or to tribal fishermen. Turning to the boating markets, and this comes from some investor presentations by Brunswick that owns Bayliner. They target 3 different kinds of boater. The committed boater, and this really you can read baby boomer. Older, affluent, committed to boating, have done it for a long time. They're the core that's going to continue to serve the industry. Family boaters, it kind of goes into boomers as well as millennials, but it's really that family aspect to it. And again, early boating experiences are important. Trying to get new ownership and growing that area is important. And then millennials, and there are quite a few millennials that are boating, and they're looking at different participation models. They don't necessarily want to own the boat. They want to join a club, peer-to-peer, partial ownerships, fractional share ownerships, et cetera. And they want new products. They want updated products. They want energy efficient, environmentally efficient systems as well. And we have to make it easier for them to use the systems. Excuse me. But these demographic changes are kind of overlaid by really what's happening to these groups. In 2015, the millennials began to outnumber the baby boomers. A little over 75 million of them, a little less than 75 million of the boomers. You can see some of the boomers were still born in '64, so they're in their mid-50s. So there's a good 5-10 years there of growth from the boomers. And then Gen X is the in-between generation group. They will take over in 2028. Now, when you're looking at a marina, you're really looking at 20, 30, 40 years down the road. So you have to be certain that you've got the demand, and that's really what I'm trying to illustrate here. Looking at the is that me beeping? No.
Cloud calling in.
Oh, okay. New boaters really aren't being replaced, or they aren't replacing outgoing boaters. So between 2005 and 2010, first-time buyers, which is really important, getting new people into the trade, 2.4 million. Exiting boaters, 2.9 million, so a net loss of 520,000 boaters US-wide. And between 2010 and 2015, it went from 2 million first-time boaters, 2.6 million exiting boaters, net loss of 600,000 boaters. So you can see in what's happening, and this includes new sales as well as used or pre-owned boats.
Well, a 10-year span, we've lost a million boaters in a 10-year span.
Yeah.
100,000 a year average.
And this straddles the recession. So 2005 was a pretty good year, and 2015 was a decent year.
Yes, we got the drop in the peak going
Right.
both ways.
Yeah. This chart here comes from a State of the Industry presentation 2017 by the National Marine Manufacturers Association. And what they did is they looked at 2005, 10, 15 actual numbers and projected out 2020 and 25. If these trends continue, we'll have a continued loss of boaters under 40 years old, a loss of boaters between 40 and 60, and all of the growth will be in the over 60 range. So we've got boaters that average age right now is 55, 56. It may be 65 10 years out. So projecting beyond that really is what I'm wanting to bring to your attention. Now, the issues of concern to Canadian boaters, the National Marine Manufacturers Association has worked with the Canadian operators, and the 5 issues of major concern to Canadian boaters and the marina operators are the value of the Canadian dollar, availability and access and moorage, just like we're concerned about regulations and standards, aging population, and fuel cost, which is a lot higher for them than it is for us. This chart next to it, though, on the right-hand side shows the number of boaters from 2000 to 2016, U.S. boaters going into BC and BC boaters coming into the United States. And the black dotted line is the value of the Canadian dollar. So obviously, when the dollar was at par, we had a lot more growth in the Canadians and less growth in the U.S. going up to Canada. That's flipped around so that from 2015 to 2016, U.S. boaters going north increased by 12%, and there was a 10% decline of Canadian boaters coming down. So I know that's being reflected in your operations at Blaine. I believe it is at Point Roberts as well. It's impacting you more than it is others. And again, it's looking at that primary, secondary, and tertiary market and what you do to take care of that. So with those three overlays, the other one is the competition. Dry storage, which is open stacked or covered stacked or just single tier, has been essentially all of the growth for the last 10 to 15 years. There have been a couple of new wet moorage marinas, but that's it. There's been some rebuilds, but very few new marinas. For dry storage, the initial expense capital is a little bit less, well, significantly less than building wet moorage. It's a little more staff intensive and high service and expensive to operate. As they explain it to me, if they own wet moorage, they might see their tenants once a year. If they own dry storage, they see them every time they move their boat. The other thing I think you really have to be careful about is that they can take customers away from wet moorage, wet moorage slips. The rates in most of the ones that we track for the enclosed systems like Twin Bridges in the Swinomish Channel and Bayside and Everett and Foss Landing down in Tacoma, those moorage rates are comparable to what the wet moorage rates are in that area. The single tier facilities, and there's a number of them in Anacortes and some up here as well, are about half of the wet moorage rates. And if you're a boater and you're only using your boat 14 days a year, you can stick it in a protected area. There's some savings in wear and tear to the boat, and you can get transient moorage for the days that you're out there. Turning to other regional marinas, the supply really has remained pretty stable. All of the other marinas, and we deal with a lot of them, are considering their futures, and they're trying to figure out if it's a rebuild that's 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 million dollars. Can they afford to do it? How do they do it? Does it pay for itself, or does it get cross-subsidized by some other line of business or by some other form of payment? And typically, our experience, particularly with the public marinas, is that the net profits available for reconstruction or major rebuilds aren't available. The net revenues on an annual basis are very flat. So those are the concerns that I have, and it just goes to, in your decision process, knowing how strong your market is, and that location, location, location is the most important thing. I look at you right now, you've got Squalicum with large waiting lists, you've got empty slips in Blaine. I think you need to figure out what you can do to resolve some of that by pricing and services. I do have some questions about whether you should move forward with ASB, given that you're in that situation. So that's my presentation. If you've got any questions, I'd be happy to field them.
It's a slippery slope.
Yeah.
I think your presentation spelled out very well that putting a marina in would be a great risk monetarily to the Port of Bellingham, I feel. Being a commercial boat owner and knowing the cost of doing business by keeping things in the water, and looking at the future folks that are going to be doing boating, our millennials, I don't think you're going to see the interest level that we have seen in the past decades. So for me, in my mind, it's a pretty easy choice, that it would be a very risky thing to do, to build a marina, and I don't think it would be very profitable for the people of Whatcom County to do so, because, once again, I go back to, we're supposed to be putting people to work. We build a marina, and you don't put too many people to work, and then you've got an uncertain future at best, from the numbers you showed us.
And this really depends upon the location again. We're doing some work for marinas, for example, in Lake Washington. There's more people on wait lists willing to pay top market prices than there are slips. And the demographics are so tight and strong there, and all of the marinas are in that kind of situation. You're not in that position right now because of the vacancies at the Blaine property.
Well, thank you for your information, Paul. It's enlightening to me.
My pleasure. Thanks very much.
Do you have questions?
I don't think I have a question, but it does seem from your analysis there that the near-term investment for particularly in dry storage has a lot more capacity for us to realize both the market demand and our opportunity for revenue. And so would you say it's a good advisement for us to look at all of our regional opportunities for dry storage here?
I think that's the case, and I guess when I think about dry storage, marinas, Port of Skagit's an example. They used to operate it themselves. Now they've got a private operator managing all of that for them. Port of Everett at Bayside did a ground lease, and the operator built the building, and it's on the basis of a minimum annual guarantee plus a shared revenue when they hit certain revenue points. So my point is that I don't know whether you have to provide it. I think it's important that it gets provided, but there are some real good public-private opportunities there.
I was a bit surprised that the cost of moorage for a dry stack was similar to wet moorage. Is that the service level that's required to move the boats around? 'Cause
Yeah,
it seems like when you're stacking, you gain
It's also the
efficiency.
market. Twin Bridges, Bayside, and Foss Landing are all full. And they're providing a concierge service. You call a half hour in advance, they have the boat in the water, or they fueled it. It's a much more like a hotel type operation with the kind of service they provide.
With flowers and donuts on the table?
Whatever you want.
Well, not to mention the fact that the boat's protected.
Right.
Much more so the maintenance on the
Absolutely.
boat is significant.
You know, this is a real big business in Florida and other places, and it's been kind of late coming up here, but I think we'll see more and more of it.
Just a quick question for me. We are one of the closest locations to the San Juans.
Right.
And it's a little bit confounding to me that being as close to the San Juan Islands as we are for recreational boating, that we're not more in demand, just because that's where they go. Yeah.
Anacortes is closer, and they got more ground.
Yeah, you're farther up the road. A lot of the market in La Conner and in the Anacortes in Skagit County marinas goes down the 405 chain into folks that are in Bellevue.
And they're full?
Yeah, they're full. Well, you know, it depends on the slip size. Some of the smaller slips are not
Across the
full.
bay when it's blowing to get to the islands. Anacortes it's a lot easier.
Yeah. That settled that. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Okay, dispensing with that, we'll move on to the GP West feasibility study update. And Brian.
He's back.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Brian Gowron, Director of Environmental Programs. This is probably the first presentation I've actually given on an environmental project in some time now, so I'm happy to talk about the real world that I work within often. Yeah. So the reason we're bringing this forward, this is an update for the Commission. There's no action or no specific direction we're looking for. The GP West Model Toxics Control Act, or MOTCA cleanup site, is at a milestone point that we're preparing to go out for public review and comment on the feasibility study, which I'll talk a little bit about here in a moment, what that details. But we wanted to brief the commission on that process, what the preferred alternative that's coming out of that looks like, and give a preview to the commission prior to the public comment period, and then there's going to be a public comment or public meeting next week as well. So this is just a preview of what that presentation is going to be like as well. I'll get into a little bit more detail on the locations, but just to step back one step here and review. Under the Model Toxic Control Act, or MODCA, the state environmental cleanup law, we are obligated to do a series of steps to achieve that cleanup. And one of the main steps that it takes the most time, has a lot of cost associated with it, a lot of detailed and back and forth coordination with the Department of Ecology, is the remedial investigation and feasibility study, or also referred to as the RIFS. And those are generally conducted under an agreed order with the Department of Ecology. So that's a legal agreement between the port and Ecology that says, here's the scope of work that we'll perform. And what that document does is that it defines the nature and extent of contamination at a site. It evaluates the migration pathways and where that contamination could be going and what could be getting exposed to that contamination. And then that's the RI. And then the FS essentially screens remedial alternatives, evaluates different technologies, and highlights a preferred alternative. So basically, the RI says what's there and where's it going and what's being exposed to it, and the FS says what can we do about it? So how do you address that? And then those are generally packaged up into a single report called the RIFS. And that's the stage we're at right here. This graphic on the bottom here shows the ecology steps. There's a remedial investigation, feasibility study, cleanup action plan would be the next step, cleanup design, and then implementation or the actual construction, followed by monitoring, and any site controls would have to be in place. So the document that we're talking about today is the feasibility study. And this one, and I'll step through this in a moment, is a little different than a typical RIFS. We're actually out for comment on just the feasibility study. And I'll explain this in a moment, but we completed a site-wide RI for the GP West site, and then broke that up into two separate units, performed FSs separately so we could move those two different units in different directions at different paces. So I'll talk about that in a moment. So this is the figure that shows the GP West MODCA site. So it's actually the whole former GP West campus that's outlined in yellow as well as in black. And this shows the two units. So the pulp and tissue mill area is the upper portion on the northern portion of the GP West site. And that's an area that we've already completed the RI, the FS, and the actual cleanup. And that cleanup was completed in 2016. The chlor-alkali area, these two units are called remedial action units, or RAUs. So the chlor-alkali RAU is highlighted in the bright yellow here. So that's the southern portion of the site, as well as the lignin building that's over by Cornwall and Laurel Street. And this is the area that we're focusing this feasibility study on. So in the way of background, the overall site, it's about 74 acres all told. From the 1920s until 2007, the pulp and tissue mill was operated on the northern portion of the site. From the 1960s till 1999, the chlor-alkali or chlorine plant was operated. And that operation made chlorine gas and sodium hydroxide for use in the pulping process, as well as for sale to market. And the way that was made was they used a mercury cell process where they used salt-enriched water or brine, and they ran an electrical current through that salt water and separated out the chlorine and the sodium hydroxide. And so the chlorine gas came off, and they captured that and used that to bleach paper, and then they sold that as well, and then they had the sodium hydroxide, the caustic, and they used that in the pulping process as well as sold it to market. And really the mercury was just a part of that electrolysis process. So it was a part of a large battery, basically, that ran current through that brine. And as that mercury was used, it was spilled, dripped, it's very heavy, it's dense, it's liquid elemental mercury. And that's some of the contamination that we're addressing now, as well as the spent wastewater that was discharged to Bellingham Bay, as well as to other areas of the site prior to the current environmental regulations and the Clean Water Act and so forth. So in 2005, the port purchased the GP West properties, and we've been working on these environmental cleanup projects ever since. We've done a lot of work to date on this, not only in the northern portion where we've completed that site, but since 2009 when we first entered into the agreed order to perform the RIFS. We amended that agreed order and allowed us to do some interim actions where we could do some cleanup actions prior to the final cleanup being determined. We removed a significant amount of petroleum contaminated material from the shoreline in 2012. And then in 2013, we actually established those two different units. We had, during those interim actions, we'd identified that there was elemental mercury that we discovered that was unanticipated. And we realized that that southern portion of the site that we're going to be talking about tonight was going to be much more complicated, much more expensive, and much more difficult to address than the remainder of the site. So we decided to break those up so we could move the northern portion of the site forward as much simpler cleanup. And it actually allows us then to have the roads that are in construction right now. If we would have waited, the roads wouldn't be done, the parks wouldn't be going in, these buildings that we've talked about tonight wouldn't be going forward. So it really did allow us to move those projects forward, as well as continuing to really thoroughly understand this southern portion of the site. But we also, in 2014, and then just last year, we completed some interim cleanup actions in this chlor-alkali area where we removed a significant amount of mercury-contaminated soil and disposed of that off-site. And then in 2014, we entered into the consent decree for the pulp and tissue mill and completed the cleanup in that area in 2016. So a lot of work has been done to date. And this is just an image that shows, I don't know how well it shows up on those screens. Really just wanted to show the extent of investigation work. So we have a ton of information and data that defines the RI. So each one of those dots represents at least one soil, groundwater, or soil vapor sample. We have over 1,000 soil samples that have been sampled at various depths throughout the soil. We have a really thorough understanding of the groundwater, where it's going, what concentrations of contaminants are in it, if any, and where we have potential exposures that have to be addressed in the cleanup action. So there's more detail in the next few figures, but that just wanted to show that the shotgun of information that we have is very robust, that ecology uses to make their determinations on how to address these cleanup sites.
You just called this shotgun, but it's a little bit more than that.
Correct, yeah, it looks like a shotgun.
It's a machine gun.
Yeah. And you focused your attention, I can see, on areas that obviously you found hot.
Yeah, that's correct. And these next few figures will highlight kind of why.
And migration patterns as well.
Yeah, where we see things, they might be going, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And they're generally corresponding to a previous operation. There's always generally a reason for why you're finding what you're finding in those areas. So, yes.
What kind of timeline are we under to have to clean this area up over in the shipping terminal area over there in our?
Well, I'll get to that at the end, kind of the next steps. But some of that is depending on. We're really still early in the stages of a preliminary design, and so there's still
I didn't
quite a
mean
bit of time.
to get you out of sync here.
No, that's okay. So based on those data points, we identified a number of areas that are of concern that we needed to address during this feasibility study. And I'll go through these kind of one by one that kind of show the different areas, and they'll be highlighted here. So in that center gray box, that's the former chlorine plant, and that is the area where we have found elemental mercury in the soil. So that's where we have actual quicksilver, liquid elemental mercury in the ground over there. We have other contaminated areas up in the northern portion of that. That's where the chlorine plant used to discharge wastewater to Bellingham Bay before the ASB was even built. So we have highly concentrated contaminated soil in that area, but it isn't in the elemental form. It's just high level concentrations of mercury in the soil. The ChemFix area is in the central port. Did you have a question, Commissioner?
So tell us what the difference between that elemental versus a highly concentration.
Sure. So it really
non-elemental.
would be visible. You can see it. So if you have a scoop of soil that has the elemental mercury in it, it has actual BBs of mercury in it. It'd be like having liquid petroleum in the soil that you can see shimmering on the surface versus you have a soil sample that you can't really see it, but you analyze it through chemical analysis and you'll see that there's an elevated concentration of mercury that's intermixed. And what happens is that mercury gets locked on to different soil particles, but at a very, very, very small scale, you can't see it. It's not really in the elemental form. And then clean soil would have very low concentrations or non-detectable concentrations of those same if you analyze that. But you maybe wouldn't be able to visually tell the difference between a dirty sample and a clean sample. So in the ChemFix area, which is in the central portion of the site, this is an area that Georgia Pacific actually had dredged out the former wastewater basin and placed contaminated sludges and mixed it with a proprietary mix called ChemFix and placed it in a low spot within the former mill site area and capped over that in 1977. That was something that the Department of Ecology didn't sanction, and so they've actually have restrictions on that area and said you have to cap it, contain it, and monitor it. And then as part of this RIFS, that was with an agreement with GP, and then as part of this RIFS, we've analyzed that to say, is that an area that we need to address in the feasibility study as well? On the southern portion of the site down here is a former stormwater swale where stormwater used to run off from the chlorine cell plant, had mercury concentrations that's in the shallow soil over there. We have the Laurel Street pipe rack, which was an area that had disposed mercury cathodes, which were and anodes, which were part of that process. There was just a construction project that just discovered them actually, and found that there was mercury contamination in that area. So we've carried those forward to be analyzed in the FS. And then in the groundwater, we have, so those were all in the soil concentrations, and then you have groundwater contamination as well. And so we have dissolved mercury that is, the groundwater flows, towards the bay, and we have dissolved mercury concentrations that are kind of surrounding the chlorine plant, which is not surprising, because that's the source area. And then, as well as, keep it more complicated, so not only do we have dissolved mercury, but we have the mercury where the chlorine was produced, as well as caustic. So caustic was probably dripped and dropped and spilled, and so we have a high pH concentration in the groundwater, pH of up to 12, which is very challenging to address, and that actually helps mobilize the mercury. So we've got another source that we have to address there. And then we had some 6 individual million-gallon tanks that the GP used to store lignin, as well as one of the tanks stored petroleum. So there were some petroleum releases in and around one of the tanks, and so there's soil and groundwater contamination associated with petroleum in that area.
One question about the south boundary over there. You said the groundwater all flows towards the bay, and the site boundary stops right where the land stops there and doesn't extend into the...
Yeah, that's a great question. So the way that the MODCA looks at a site is defined by where contamination has come to be present. So it doesn't matter where property boundaries are, ownership boundaries, or shorelines, but it really does just coincide with the groundwater concentrations at that shoreline are clean. And so we've drawn that boundary just on the outside of that. So we have documented that groundwater flow path is going in that direction, but we have clean samples at the shoreline, so we've drawn that boundary right there.
So so you're saying we've done sufficient testing around the south perimeter?
Yep.
To find there's no need for additional mediation,
That's right.
Boundary.
Yeah, so what the next steps, this is just saying what's there, the next step is to say what we can do about it. So that's why we have included some actions that are potentially in that area if we get more data that says different. But currently, it is not entering into the surface water or into the sediments from that area. So then the last area that we have in the chlor-alkali remedial action unit is some shallow petroleum contaminated soils in and around the lignin building. So that's likely associated with the former loading docks and railroad tracks that were located in that area. Relatively easy to address, but one more area to address. Oh, sorry, one more. And then there's some miscellaneous metals that are dissolved in the groundwater. Yeah. Yeah. Wait, there's more.
We got one more.
So pH of 12.
That's right. In some areas, yeah.
No way.
Yeah. So actually, during one of our interim actions that we did, we were pumping the groundwater down to access some of that elemental mercury, and they had to change out the gaskets in their pumps multiple times because of the caustic nature of the groundwater in that area.
That changes the whole dynamic.
Yeah. So this is one of the, honestly, one of the most complicated sites probably in Washington State to address from Department of Ecology's perspective. Just the nature of the contamination between having elemental mercury that is a liquid metal at room temperature that is 8 times heavier than water or than rock, and that volatilizes as well at room temperature, combined with pH 12 groundwater, and then just the geographic footprint. There's a lot going on there as well. So it's very complicated, and it's one of the reasons why it's taken as long as it has to get where we are today.
Glad to tell you what, I'm glad it's you and not me.
So moving into this figure, this is not going to take a whole lot of time. What I wanted to do was just to show how we analyze the different alternatives. So taking that information of what we have, and that was the last few slides to say, okay, here's the contaminants that we have and where they are. The next step is to do the FS and say, okay, what can we do about them? What are the technologies we can use? How do you combine those different technologies? So for a petroleum cleanup site, like for a gas station, you'd maybe have 1 or 2 alternatives. You either cap it or dig it out. This one, because of the nature of all the stuff we just talked about, is a very complicated set of alternatives. And actually we came up with 8 different alternatives and combinations of different technologies to evaluate what's the preferred alternative that ecology would want us to select. And without going into the detail here, I just wanted to highlight kind of how that analysis is done. And you've got all of these up here in the yellow box are all common elements that we will be including in every alternative. So all the prior activities that we've done, some groundwater monitored natural attenuation, removing of some contaminated soil in certain areas, and then the rest of these are different combinations, with generally speaking, starting at alternative 1 being the least environmental benefit, but and then moving over to alternative 8 having the most environmental benefit. And what that means is we've got a range of different ways we evaluate that. How long does it take to recover the site? Is there short-term exposures, long-term exposures? What's the permanence of each one of these? And so there's a whole evaluation that goes into how these alternatives can be looked at. And then of course, cost is also looked at. And these range from $12.2 million on the low end to $69.8 million for the fullest, most environmental benefit and highly protective cleanup that is on alternative 8. And I'd be happy at any time to go into those in a little more detail if you want to sit down one-on-one, but this is just to kind of give the preview of those. And what I'm going to do then is really highlight what the preferred alternative is. So what the Department of Ecology does is take those environmental analysis of like permanence and the other elements that I mentioned and compares those alternatives versus cost. So which one has the most environmental benefit for the least cost? And that's within the law. The law actually wants to use cost as an analysis. And so this analysis shows that. The blue bars show the relative ranking of those environmental benefits. And you can see, generally speaking, going from alternative 1 over to alternative 8, you have an increasing environmental benefit. And that's by those different combinations of the elements on the previous slide. And then the green bar is the relative cost, or not the relative cost, but the cost for each one of those alternatives, going from 12 million to 69 million. And then that black bar in the middle and the points show the ratio between those two. And alternative 4, based on that analysis, has the best ratio of environmental benefit and relative cost, with alternative 4 being what ecology defines as permanent to the maximum extent practicable. They don't choose easy words to use, but that then identifies what would be the preferred alternative that we would carry forward into the actual next steps of the cleanup action plan and so forth. Yes?
So question, so we're gonna have more than one option to move forward with. I mean, they're not gonna, the environment, they won't come and say, okay, this is what you need to do. They'll have a minimum of what we need to do, and then we can go as far from that minimum as we.
Oh yeah, that's correct. Yeah, so a couple things to note. One is I should have stated that all of these alternatives meet the minimum threshold requirements. So even alternative 1, there's no such thing like a do-nothing alternative. That's kind of the thing of the past. That even alternative 1 meets all of ecology's minimum thresholds. You'd have to do a lot more to make it protective. Maybe you'd have a lot of restrictions. You couldn't have certain uses. But so that's the starting point. And then the disproportionate cost analysis shown here does select what ecology would say, that's what they're going to recommend we do. We could electively elect to do more. I don't think ecology would ever say no to that, but they're not going to require us to do any of the other alternatives unless during this public process that we're going through right now that there's an identified big miss or something that we did not consider, then they will reevaluate that.
So if we were to do less than their, if you were to do the 2 instead of the 4, what you're saying is there'd be a lot of restrictions on the ground use.
Right, right. And actually, that would be an interesting exercise to go through with ecology. I don't think they would ever they wouldn't stop us from doing more. But if we said, the DCA said this is the alternative, but we want to actually go back and do 1 or 2, that would be a detailed discussion we'd have to have with them on how that would go. Because the law says the DCA kind of defines what the cleanup is going to be. So with that in mind, to try to keep this quick too, is I'm just going to walk through what that alternative 4 includes. So the elements that will be in that alternative. So I'm not going to go through all 8 alternatives. This is really just the preferred alternative. So this figure here shows those areas that I highlighted previously, and then I'll layer on the different elements of each one of those. So in the center of the site here, which is the center of the contamination area, is the cell building. That's where the elemental mercury is. That is TPH, which is petroleum removal. So we'll remove some petroleum contaminated soil from that area. And then what we're going to do, what the proposal is to do, is to stabilize all the elemental mercury and contaminated soil in place. So we take in situ soil stabilization, where we have cement and sulfur and a kind of a mixture of different materials that we would auger into the ground that will lock up and bind that mercury in place. That's a method that we used in the interim actions, except we took it out, mixed it with this material, and then disposed of the contaminated soil off-site. Due to the volume of this material and the amount of it there, that skewed the disproportionate cost analysis. That was looked at in one of the higher end alternatives, but it skewed the cost so far that the in situ stabilization was selected as the preferred alternative in this area. We will do some soil removal in these areas. This is not the areas that have the elemental mercury, because the costs are so much different for addressing this. This is not material that would have to be stabilized, but due to its locations along right next to the shoreline, that's an area that ecology would like us to address that and remove that soil, because it does have the potential of impacting the shoreline and the bay, as well as some mercury contaminated soil that's along the stormwater swale, which is actually on Burlington Northern Santa Fe, BNSF's property, and they have requested that ecology require us to remove that from their property. So we can take that material and actually consolidate it on site and cap it. It doesn't have to be disposed of off site.
Question on that. Who owns the property that the stuff is on?
BNSF?
How come they're not doing something?
Well, they have been named by the Department of Ecology as a potentially liable party because of ownership in this area. But the source of this material was because of stormwater that fell onto Georgia Pacific's property prior to ours acquiring it, and the stormwater, transported that material onto their property. So, did you have a comment on that, Frank?
So all of the potentially liable parties are jointly and severally liable 100% each. So BNSF is a potentially liable party because they have contamination on their property. Then, how do you allocate? You allocate on what are called equitable principles. They're sometimes called the Gore factors from U.S. Senator Al Gore. And those factors relate to essentially a judge's decision on who had the benefit, who caused it, who benefited from it. Did people do it on purpose? Was it on accident? So you have to ask yourself when dealing with BNSF, what's the cost-benefit analysis of asking them to participate financially? Certainly we can do that. But we have to get further downstream as to cost to understand what that cost is, what we think their share of it would be. They're going to claim, we're just adjacent property owners. We didn't do any of this. In the port, you bought GP's position, so you're in GP's shoes. There's the one who made the benefit from it. But we would say, well, they're the owner. You're still an owner. So back and forth, and if they shipped some of this stuff out of the facility by rail, that would be something to talk about with them, because then they made a profit. So that's yet to be determined. I'm not saying we won't talk to GP or we will. I'm saying staff will come with a recommendation concerning that issue.
Okay, thank you, Frank.
Sure.
It is a relatively small footprint of this area. It's an accessible portion of the site that we can just, excuse me, just pull that material back from our side of the tracks, so.
Just checking. Push
Okay.
the lever.
So moving on here, a couple other elements, excuse me. I almost made it through.
Those Cuban cigars, I'm telling you.
Yeah. In the area that we have the high pH area, we have in situ neutralization of what we call the caustic core. So the area that, oh my gosh, sorry. Yeah. I know. Yeah, on that note. So just a couple more elements here. We've got the in situ neutralization of the pH area. That actually will remove will neutralize that and reduce the mobilization of the mercury from that area. We'll continue to monitor groundwater in that area to make sure that that is occurring. So that's over time to make sure that that concentrations are reducing. And then to your point earlier, Commissioner, we do have some contingency actions so that if that monitoring shows that there is not a reduction in contamination along the shoreline, we could put in some treatment barriers along that area that would treat that groundwater prior to expressing itself in the subtidal areas. So.
In treat, do you mean just block?
No, it'd actually be like a pass-through. It'd be like a permeable reactive barrier was what it's called. So it would allow the groundwater to flow through it. It would have a treatment media in it. And then it would treat that groundwater, and then on the backside, it would have absorbed any contamination that's in there. You can then remove that treatment media and replace it and replenish it. Sometimes it's like a series of walls that funnel groundwater through a treatment area, or it's a permeable barrier.
A water filter.
Yeah, exactly.
Removable water filter. Okay.
And then we have
Refrigerator.
other areas where we have monitored natural attenuation from groundwater contamination. And then the rest of the area, we propose capping. So this will be impervious capping of the ChemFix area, of any remaining soil contamination. Similar to the capping that was done on the GP, the pulp and tissue mill. It could be a combination of soil capping, pavement, concrete, future buildings, that sort of thing. So capping the remaining contamination in place.
That would help us level that area out anyway.
Yeah, it's similar to what we did on the other portion of the site. So for the next steps, we have a public comment period, a 30-day public comment period on this feasibility study. We have a public meeting next week, which will be held at the new Department of Ecology headquarters, or Bellingham field office that's just up here off the truck route. Following that process, if the ecology gets comments, they'll respond to those comments with any changes that are necessary, and if not, we would finalize the feasibility study in mid-2018. Then after that point, ecology will actually select a final cleanup action, and then we will enter into any agreements to move forward into those next steps. That has yet to really be defined timing-wise, because we have yet to figure out if there's going to be a significant amount of comments. Once we get into design, I think it is at least a minimum of a couple of years of design work. This is a complicated site. We'll have to do some pilot tests, pilot studies to see how those stabilization techniques can work. And prior to actual cleanup, it's going to be at least 2 to 3 years before we really get on the ground in actual cleanup construction. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any other questions.
I have none. I pretty much asked what I had. Very nice presentation, Brian. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Commissioners.
And with that, we'll move it to other business. Commissioners have any other business?
I don't.
I have what you could call it under business. First, the Port of Bellingham for a long time had an issue of not regularly listening to our tenants and so on and so forth. And I'd like to commend our staff, all of our staff, from our director on down, at their ability to work with our tenants and listen to them and integrate their thoughts and ideas and the things we need to do to help them to make their businesses better. So thank you for the great job you've been doing, because it's very evident when I go around and talk to people that they're very pleased at a hand the port is putting forward at this time to help them. So thank you very much.
Any other business? Meeting adjourned.